But the key, in my opinion, to confidence is, 30% of it, make sure your mind's right. 70%, make sure you're prepared.
Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with thought leaders from not only the entrepreneurial domain, but also from the world of technology, psychology, philosophy, economics, politics, biology, management and leadership, health and fitness, and more to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, avoid relying too heavily on the first piece of information encountered, and ultimately to make better informed decisions so that you can more readily become the person that you want to become. Each and every Friday, I'll also bring you Fast Fix Friday, some short, high-impact and easily digestible insights to have you finishing your week on a high. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning those ideas into reality, creating a culture of innovation, or partnering with startups, visit www.collectivecampus.io. Without further ado, let's kick into today's episode. Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 266 with Dr. Jason Selk. Jason Selk is a best-selling author, psychologist, and two-time World Series winning sports psychologist with the St Louis Cardinals. In fact, while serving as director of mental training for the Cardinals, Selk helped the team win their first World Series in over 20 years. And in 2011, he assisted the Cardinals in the historic feat of winning their second World Championship in a 6-year period. Selk is a regular contributor to publications such as Forbes, Inc., Success, ABC, CBS, ESPN, NBC Radio, and he's been featured in USA Today, CNBC, and Men's Health. Dr. Selk's second book, Executive Toughness, is a best-selling business book, and his first book, 10-Minute Toughness, is on pace to be one of the best-selling sport psychology books of all time. His latest book, Organize Your Team Today, has just been ranked by Bloomberg as a top 10 leadership book for 2018. We discussed a number of very important topics on this show, including 1. How to develop your confidence even after long periods of purported failure. 2. How to maintain your focus in an age of distraction. And 3. How to create and maintain a positive, empowering, and mentally tough outlook in just 2 minutes a day. These topics only scratch the surface of what we discussed. I really enjoyed speaking with Jason as he's a psychologist whose views are grounded in hard science, and he drew from his time with the St Louis Cardinals as well as his work in applying sports psychology to business, which provided for lots of valuable and actionable takeaways. As he suggests, if you can take just one thing from this conversation, remember it, and apply it, then that's better than trying to take 10 things away and forgetting all of them, as we often tend to do in this age of content overload. With that, I bring you the one and only Dr. Jason Selk. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Steve, thanks for having me. A pleasure to be with you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and you're joining me all the way from St. Louis. It's Missouri, right? Because I've heard people say Missouri.
Steve, you can call it whatever you want. Yes, I am in St. Louis.
Fantastic. See, as an Australian who's never actually been to St. Louis, my only reference point for St. Louis is a Simpsons episode featuring Aerosmith, in which Steven Tyler addresses the crowd, "Hello, St. Louis," and then Joe Perry leans in and says, "I think you mean Springfield, Steven."
I hope we have a little bit more claim to fame than that, but
I'm sure you do. Well, look, it's great to have you on the show, and we've kind of talked about mental fortitude and toughness on this show before, and so it's a topic that I think, and a lot of people in the entrepreneurial game, in the corporate executive game, will tell you that the one thing you need to work on as a leader is your mental toughness. And Former US President Calvin Coolidge, he's got this great quote that I absolutely love, in which he says that nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. I mean, how much of that has to do with a lack of mental toughness?
Well, I would, to be a realist here, I would say that is a big piece of the puzzle. Let me just, I want to fill you in. These are two important fundamentals I think very few people unfortunately know about, but if you want to be mentally tough, you absolutely have to know these and master these fundamentals. Number one, something called PCT, problem-centric thought. It is, Steve, the biological tendency for the human brain to focus on our problems or the negative. I'll give you a couple of examples. It's very common for a person on a daily basis to do 100 things right, one thing less than perfect, and when they're driving home from work, they're going to focus on that imperfection. They're going to overlook all the things they did well, and their brain has a tendency to zero in on the negative. That's, again, PCT. Another example, oxygen is the most valuable resource known to our species. But when is the last time you or any of the listeners out there have thought to themselves while taking a breath, wow, this is awesome. I have an abundance, the most valuable resource. Again, compare that with when's the last time you or any of the listeners have had the thought, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough love, I don't have enough respect, I don't have enough, you fill in the blank. Again, I don't know why, but the truth of the matter is our brains are built to have that negative or problem focus. Now, the second fundamental that complicates the situation even more is something called expectancy theory. Your definition of expectancy theory is that which you focus on expands. It's important to realize human beings, we are made up of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And it's our thoughts that will control the way we feel and the way we behave. So again, if you look at the normal person, it's totally normal to focus on the negative, but by doing what's totally normal, you're creating more negative, more problems. You're inhibiting performance. You're handicapping your ability. You're creating the conditions for being unsuccessful. Mm-hmm. And that's where mental toughness, I think, comes in, is first you have to be able to recognize, okay, listen, I can control my thoughts. I don't have to let my thoughts focus on the negative. And then the second piece, if you can learn to control or choose productive thoughts, thoughts that focus on the positive, or I like to take it even a step further with the clients I work with, to really focus on solutions, action steps of what you can do to either solve your problems, improve your performance, make your life better. But if you can just know this, that you get to choose, there are unproductive thoughts, which are completely normal. There are productive thoughts that are abnormal. Choosing the productive thoughts, to me, that is mental toughness. And I think that's what a lot of, when you have people like presidents and ambassadors and famous people, successful people talk about mental toughness, that in essence is what it is, that thought control, choosing thoughts to be focused on productive thoughts to cause more productivity.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. And I think longtime listeners of the show will be familiar with stoicism and concepts like mindfulness and focusing on what you can control and not just the negatives. And just recently we covered a book summary on Robert Sapolsky's Behave, which is all about the neuroscience of behavior and how our amygdala is just wired to force us to look for those negative stimulants in our environment and excuse all the positive ones. And there's a great quote on this, which is something like, twice I did right, I heard never. Once I did wrong, I heard forever. Something to that effect. Yeah. Because people will always latch on to the negative as opposed to the positive. And all you need to do is turn on, say, CNN, and you'll just be overcome with negative news. Maybe something to the order of 90% of the news tends to be negative leaning, because that's what's going to get clicks. That's what's going to get eyeballs. But on what you've talked about there around focusing on the positive. To me, that kind of aligns with this whole notion of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jocko Willink, Jason, but he's a former Navy SEAL who's all about leadership coaching. And one thing he talks about is extreme ownership. And when you take ownership, you empower yourself to change things for the better. But when you make excuses, you're effectively giving that power to forces outside of yourself that you don't control. And you're effectively assuming the position of the victim, which doesn't serve you and, in fact, can sabotage your goals. So it sounds like that's kind of like what you're talking about there.
Yeah, it's exactly. And I've read a couple of books you just mentioned, specifically Jocko's book. Mm-hmm. But here's the issue, Steve, that I found is it's one thing for a professional to say, okay, you really should choose the right type of thoughts. It's a completely different ballgame to know how to do that. Because, listen, you're talking about biological training in terms of, your brain's a muscle just like your bicep. Again, we could make the analogy or the metaphor that it's very normal to have a weak bicep. I mean, if I'm born and I don't do any of the abnormal activities like, going to the gym and doing the curls and so forth, well, my biceps will be weak. And that's totally normal. It's abnormal to have strong biceps. I have to do abnormal activities to create the strength. The same is true if we train mental strength. It's not a pep talk. And that's where, I think you've done enough background on me to know things like the mental workout. I mean, I know for me, I personally spend minutes each day training my brain so that my thoughts during the day will be productive, so that I am focused on things I can control.
So on that, Jason, that comes out of your previous book, 10-Minute Toughness, which is a proven routine of daily exercises that you say helps boost brain power and helps your clients and readers of the book achieve a competitive edge. So, I mean, what are some of the things that people can start to do to actually tap into that positive mindset?
So 10-Minute Toughness was my first book, and that book really was written for professional athletes. Mm-hmm. And the mental workout I outlined in that book really is quite different than the mental workout I would suggest for, say, you or me to complete. It's in 10-Minute Toughness, that mental workout was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. What I would suggest for you and I is the mental workout more in my second book, Executive Toughness, mm-hmm. which is only 1 minute and 40 seconds. I could take, we could take 3 or 4 minutes and just real quick run through it if you'd like.
We've got time. Let's do it.
Okay, so the first thing you would do is you take what's called a centering breath. You breathe in for 6 seconds, you hold for 2, you breathe out for 7. To save time, I'm not going to necessarily give people the background and the justification for each of the tools, but just know this, Steve, mm-hmm. I don't prescribe anything that is not 100% backed in science. Everything is purposeful, and one of my main sayings is when in doubt, delete. So if it's not one of the most important things to do, it's not going to be in there. So just for the sake of us getting through it quickly, trust that these tools are proven, totally backed in science. Anyway, you take a 15-second breath where you breathe in for 6, you hold for 2, then you breathe out for 7. Mm-hmm. And then what I do is I repeat to myself something called an identity statement. It's really just a personal mantra.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be more than 2 or 3 sentences long, and I really want it to focus on your strengths, what you want to accomplish. But the main rule with the identity statement is you have to say it as if it's already been accomplished. Okay, so for example, when I first started in the sports psychology world, my performance statement was, I outwork the competition every day. I am the most effective sports psychology consultant in the world. Mm-hmm. Now, neither one of those were true at the time, Steve. My work ethic, really, I was just getting out of graduate school and didn't understand how hard a person really has to work to be great. And I hadn't done anything of any significance at that point to earn any even statewide recognition, to be honest with you. But I said to myself that same statement over and over, day after day. And at some point I started to believe it. And then I started to perform at a much higher level. And when I wasn't performing at that level, it was serving as great motivation to get my butt in gear and get to a place where I really would be living that. It really ties into the research on self-image. But anyway, that's the second tool. I just repeat that, again, identity statement or personal mantra, but I'm saying it as if it's already been accomplished, even if it hasn't been. Third tool, something called a personal highlight reel. This is where we're going to do 60 seconds worth of visualization. The first 30 seconds, I'd like a person, it's called the vision of self-image. I'd like a person to watch a 30-second video of where they want their life to be in 5 years, who they want to be in the important areas of their life, what levels of success they want to be having. So, for example, I'll watch a 30-second video, and it's for the last couple of years, it's been the same video every day. It's where I want to be with my own personal health. It's where I want to be with my relationships with my wife and kids. It's the level of career success and financial stability I want to have 5 years from now. But it's all very, very specific. It's all symbolic of those, again, the success in those priority areas of my life. That's the first 30 seconds of visualization. 5 years from now or so, who and how do I want my life to be? All right. And then I'll take another 30 seconds and visualize just the upcoming 24 hours, really through the lens of, okay, 5 years from now, if I really want to be living that vision I just looked at, what are some of the things I need to do today? How well do I need to do those things today? How much do I need to do? What time do I need to do those things today? So I'm really just visualizing, getting kind of a highlight reel of my upcoming day, what I need to do, when I need to do it, and how well it needs to be done. If 5 years from now, I really am going to be living that vision of self-image that I looked at in the first 30 seconds. All right, that's a minute total of visualization. And then I just repeat again the same identity statement, just in my head. I don't have to say it out loud. And then I take that 15-second centering breath again. In total, it's roughly a minute and 40 seconds. I would tell you there's probably not a better way to start training your mind to be prepared and organized for the upcoming day, but also, again, retraining that PCT out of your brain and getting more in control of, working on controlling the thoughts in your head so that you are actually focused on the things that are going to be helpful, create happiness, improve your level of success and performance.
That's fantastic. And I think, I've been practicing every morning now for a number of years, and I know a lot of my listeners have, say, meditation practices where they have particular mantras and whatnot about how they want to show up every day. And I mentioned Stoicism earlier, and I guess it's one thing to have particular intentions about how we want to show up that day, but there may be certain things that come out of left field that we're not expecting that can shake that sort of core and that intention for the day. And there's a great excerpt from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, where he says, begin each day by telling yourself that today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, all that type of stuff. But it's on my part to choose how I want to respond to that they cannot shake that core. So just being conscious that you will encounter all sorts of things during the day, but it's your choice how you choose to interpret and respond to that. And that then comes back to that intention about who you want to be. Not only on that particular day, but what's going to help you achieve the goals and the person you want to be, like you said, 5 years from now.
Yeah, no, I think you bring another really great point up, that normal people are oftentimes surprised by adversity. And I think mentally tough people have learned adversity is a part of life. And the real goal is when it hits, you've got to figure out how you can thrive or how you can take advantage of the adversity. And again, it's really kind of an advanced level of mental toughness. I think if you do things like mental workouts, and another thing I would tell people they should be doing is something called success logs, where you're on a regular basis just identifying what you're doing well, 2 or 3 things you've done well that day, 1 thing you want to improve, how you're going to make the improvement. Just answering those 3 simple questions combined with mental workouts really starts to take you to a place of having a base foundation of mental toughness, so that when adversity does strike, you're not overwhelmed by it. I think most of us these days are just, you have so many things being thrown at you, and coupled with the PCT mentality and tendency in our heads, most people are just overwhelmed. And if you throw anything else at them, it's likely to have them go underwater for a while. And that's the part where if you have the mental toughness, you're not feeling like you're just surviving. You're really kind of putting yourself in a position of control. And when adversity does strike, you have so much freed up mental capacity, or channel capacity as it's called, that you're able to then very quickly, very efficiently get your mind focused on, okay, this is a bad thing happening to me. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to take this bad thing and maybe use it to my advantage? Because if, like a baseball player, if a baseball player shows up and it's a really windy day, every player is experiencing the same wind. But the mental toughness, the players who have that mental toughness, when the wind shows up, they realize, okay, the people I'm competing against today will be focused on the wind, and I will be focused on those things that I can do to take advantage of the situation, considering this windy day. You know, it's a very small difference, but produces a tremendous difference in result.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And you mentioned baseball, and just for our audience's benefit, you were fundamental in helping your home team, the St. Louis Cardinals, win the 2011 World Series, working with the team in the space of mental toughness as a sports psychologist. I'm keen to unpack whether or not you have some awesome stories, or just one story you can share, Jason, about how you helped a player or the team overcome mental adversity to triumph on that particular season.
Well, you know, I was lucky enough. I started with the Cardinals in 2006. We won the World Series the first year I was with the team. And then I stayed with the team through the 2011 World Series, which we won again, as you just mentioned. So I was really lucky to be a part of 2 World Series championships. And, you know, it's you know, I think a lot of people would say, wow, you know, you were there your first year. They hadn't won one in 24 years, and you win one the first year, and then you win one 5 years later. And they haven't won one since. Well, you were really the magic sauce. Well, I'd love to take the credit for that. But anybody who's worked in an organization of that level of success and that size knows that no one person is the reason for either loss or wins. It's really a team approach. But I tell you, the St. Louis Cardinals, one of the things I was so impressed with the St. Louis Cardinals organization, they do a couple of things really well. They manage expectations really well, and they also have what's called that relentless solution focus. So you saw examples of that relentless solution focus in 2011. The Cardinals were down, I think, 3 times to their last strike in Game 6. You know, it's Game 6, I think, is still considered the greatest World Series game of all time. It really was quite a spectacular, whether you're a Cardinal fan or not. It was a great feat of mental toughness where the team just refused to quit. And there's really kind of a mantra amongst players and people even in front office. The team really kind of had this idea. It's really hard to beat a team who refuses to quit.
So sorry, Jason, for our Australian listeners who may not be familiar with Game 6 of that particular season, I mean, what was the score? Where did that, where does the story come from? So were they down by a massive margin? Can you just give us a little bit of a backstory there?
Yeah, so there were 3, like I said, there were 3 times in the game where the Cardinals were down to their last strike. That if the person up to bat with the Cardinals gets one more strike on him, the game's over. I think in the 8th inning, we were down by 3 or 4 runs, and they managed to tie it up. And then Texas took the lead again, and we tied it up again. And so, you know, they kept taking the lead, but the Cardinals just refused to like I said, they refused to quit. And, you know, you can apply that saying it's hard to beat a team who refuses to quit. You can apply that to yourself or to any individual. It's hard to beat a person who refuses to quit. And again, that's a lot of that is mental toughness. Okay. But go back, I said there were 2 things, said managing expectations and that relentless solution focus. I really believe a lot of the mental toughness, physical skill, ability, high-level performance, even behind the scenes, had to do with the concept managing expectations. Managing expectations is something I think is a very, very underrated skill, and a lot of people don't even know what it means. But I'll tell you, the first day on the job with the St. Louis Cardinals, I can remember the assistant general manager, who then became the manager and now is president of operations. He looked at me and he said, here's the deal. If you don't perform with your players at a higher level than they would perform without you, you will be fired immediately. Mm-hmm. Now, I tell the story, and actually when I tell the story, a lot of people are somewhat horrified that that's the mentality of the organization. And I would tell you just the opposite. See, I was so glad to know up front what was expected of me, because it then gave me the opportunity to do what I needed to do to make sure I met those expectations. Whereas I think a lot of organizations, they don't do as good a job of managing expectations, whether it be with their personnel or with their clients. And so then what you have, and Stephen Covey talked about this, he said, when there's a breakdown in a relationship, it could be any relationship, parent, child, husband, wife, client to, the service provider. It doesn't matter. Any relationship, it's 100% can be traced back to a lack of expectations being managed effectively. And I wrote about this in my latest book, Organize Your Team Today. Yep. It's chapter number 2. It's so important. I mean, look at the construction business. I don't know how it is where you are, but in the construction business, it's really kind of commonplace for the construction, whether we're going to build you a house or we're doing some reconstruction on your current home. They'll say, yeah, it'll be done at this time, at this price, and nowhere near either one of those.
It's the same down here, Jason.
Okay. And that's what I mean is, think how much better that industry would be if they understood managing expectations. And the same is true, and this is my point with the Cardinals. They do an excellent job when someone like me comes in of telling me right up front, this is what's expected of you. They do a great job, whether it would have been Tony La Russa, the manager of the team, talking to players, or other players talking to teammates. Everybody really values the importance of managing expectations, letting people know what is expected and what is needed for us to perform at the level we're trying to perform and to win.
Yeah. And you mentioned your new book, Organize Your Team Today, which incidentally was included in Bloomberg's top 10 leadership books of the year. So congratulations on that. But aside from managing expectations, the book explores topics like collective mental toughness, where there is a shared understanding of goals, limitations, roles, and personalities. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book, The Rebel Playbook by Deborah Corey, which is all about employee engagement. And she says something which I drew parallels with Organize Your Team Today, just around having a team who, 1, believes in the mission of the organization, 2, believes that mission can actually be achieved, and 3, knows how they fit. What are your views on that? Because a lot of our listeners will be either corporate executives or entrepreneurs leading teams and trying to get the best out of those teams.
No, I think it's very much in line with some of the concepts that Tom Bartow, the co-author, and I talk about in the book. In particular, 2 chapters, turning team chemistry into team cohesion, which again, it's the whole idea of you must know what the roles are and there must be role integrity, meaning, again, to use the baseball analogy, if you have 9 players on the field, everyone knows the space they're responsible for. And the greatest defensive teams, they're going to cover that space, and they're going to cover it right up to the absolute line. And then that's where the next teammate is going to pick up. Well, it's easy in baseball. It's very difficult in organizations to see that line because it's not necessarily a big pasture of grass where you can basically draw the paint line on the field for the players. So yes, identifying your role and then understanding what the expectations of performance within your role and knowing where your space is, where that role integrity is, so that you take it right up to the line and then the next player can pick it up right from there. The other chapter, I think, that you're kind of referring to is something we call talent selection and development, where I think you have a lot of organizations focus on either one or the other. And really what you'll find with the greatest organizations is you must be a thought leader in finding the best talent, especially these days. I really feel like being average and unfortunately incompetence seems to be just happening so much more often in the professional world. It's really important for you to find the right people and the right fit of people for your organization. We talk about, there are certain processes that you can follow to make sure that not only you're finding the right person, but the right person for your organization. And then you can't just lay back and think, okay, they'll develop themselves. You must offer guidance. There must be coaching. There must be strategic development so that your players, your employees continue to develop, not just generally speaking, but very specifically within that role that they're trying to fill for the organization.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on talent acquisition and engagement there, and I'm no doubt you'd be familiar with the Netflix culture deck and how their whole philosophy is to pay at the top of markets, bring the best people on, and therefore they don't need to drown them in process just to make sure they do the right thing. Because even if they do the wrong thing, they're quick on the mark and they'll resolve the issue and they'll keep moving forward because they want a culture of innovation where they're free to experiment and so on. Now, that's great for Netflix. I think their market cap is something north of 70 billion these days. But what if you are, say, a smaller organization who doesn't have the liberty of paying top of market? Should you be looking at things like values alignment to attract those people to your organization in the first place? And what other things could you be doing to attract top talent?
Yeah, so that's just another really good question you're bringing up. And one of the things I've noticed that it really is different. Now, I'm a big believer. Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE, he had a process of talent acquisition, which was, what was it, the 3 Ps and 1 E? It might have been 4 Ps and 1 E, where I think it really is looking for the alignment of morals and values. He's trying to find the right people, do they have the right energy? Do they influence other people the right way? What's their work ethic? So there are some models out there that we talk about. And again, I think it'd be remiss on my part to say, well, this model works for this organization or even this industry. I think you really have to treat each organization, each company, each team differently. And it doesn't take tremendous effort to figure out, okay, what really do we need in talent acquisition? But the big piece, I'd tell you, if you don't have the money, you just have to put the sweat equity into it. You have to take the time within your leadership to identify, okay, what are those traits we're looking for? And then you must identify or create an interview process that will vet out those people who don't have those traits. And what you'd find, like the St. Louis Cardinals, they are historically one of the most successful teams, but also one of the most successful teams with a very, very reasonable salary cap. They don't spend as much money on players, and they do it. Again, they were absolutely brilliant. They used research by Carol Dweck. Now, she was who wrote the book Mindset, and I know when I was with the team in 2006, 2007, the book Mindset, she was just finishing the book, and we were actually trying to, for the first time, identify certain characteristics that we could use, we could train our people on, our scouts on, from the mental side to start to identify some of these things. And we actually called Dr. Dweck and, had her give us some ideas on finding players, asking certain questions that were going to lead us, again, to those qualities that we were looking for in players. So I'd say each individual organization must be treated individually. Find out within the organization what are those traits, and then put the effort into creating a system. For example, don't have just one interview with people. Have 6 interviews. Make sure a couple of those interviews are out in a social setting. Mm-hmm. What you do, there's a concept, desensitization. People can only put their best foot forward for so long, just like with dating. You can have a couple of dates with someone and think you want to marry them and be with them for the rest of your life, only to find out on the 5th date you don't even want to date them any longer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that when it comes to things like dating and marriage, we'll take our time. Well, ideally, we should take our time making those life decisions. But when it comes to hiring a person for your team who could be playing a very important role or not playing that very important role, we tend to jump into it after, say, 1 or 2 interviews.
And that's one of the things that in that chapter of talent acquisition we absolutely address, because you're right. Again, I'm not going to say that who you hire is as important as who you marry, but it's important. It's important enough where you really should be thinking about the process. What do I want? And how can I best be sure to get it? Because interviewing someone once or twice look, you can be fooled. There is no doubt in 1 or 2 interviews.
Yeah, could not agree more. And I speak from experience there. So I am totally on board with that. Earlier on in the conversation, Jason, you mentioned focus, and I know it's a key focus, incidentally, of your previous book, Executive Toughness, the mental training program, where you talk about things like accountability, focus, and optimism. Now, on focus, you're no doubt very familiar with the whole psychology of flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I've had psychologists and marketers on the program previously talking about things like smartphone addiction, tech addiction, and how we're constantly being drawn into cyberspace. And as a result, we're never really finding that flow, finding that deep work to get our best work done. I imagine that this is something that you've had to address with some of your clients. And if so, what kind of methods or techniques do you encourage people to adopt so that they can stay focused on getting their work done and their best work done?
Yes. So if you look at the brain and cognitive neuroscience and performance, it really all boils down to something called channel capacity. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of focus on the phones, because the phones and we're constantly plugged into everyone else out there. Our channel capacity is just the biological bandwidth of the human brain. One of the biggest mistakes people make is we want to believe that we have more bandwidth than we do, and it's just not the case. If you look at the human bandwidth, there are a couple of very important numbers to remember when it comes to channel capacity: 3 and 1. The human brain can only keep in working memory up to 3 things at a time. Now, I know that there was the preliminary research on this, which was done with numbers or digits, said that you could hold 7 digits or numbers, and that was really the basis for the phone number. The original phone number was 7 digits long. Well, we're not talking about digits here. We're talking about 3-dimensional concepts where they're just so much larger than trying to remember just a single number. The magic number with concepts is 3. So on a daily basis, you really want to be clear, okay, what are my 3 most important activities I need to get done each day? Now, the next number, the number 1, is important to realize when it comes to improvement or change. Mm-hmm. The human brain, and especially these days, I would be willing to tell you almost every adolescent and every adult, because of how connected we are, we have overloaded our channel capacity. Yep. So anytime you're trying to improve something, it ought to be just one at a time, one thing at a time. And think about even this podcast. People are out there, and there are going to be people listen to this podcast and read a book and maybe listen to another podcast today, and they're going to try to pick up 3 things from this podcast and 2 things from that book, and there's just no chance for long-term consistency. So just, you must learn, when it comes to performance, you must learn to respect channel capacity. My favorite quote in my 3rd book, Organize Tomorrow Today, it's on page 6, and I put it again in the most recent book, Organize Your Team Today, but it's this, and it's based on this research on channel capacity. Highly successful people never get everything done in any one given day. But what they always do is get their most important things done each and every day. Now, I'd boil that down again, that every day you should go into the day knowing what your three most important, and of the three, what's the one must activity that you must get done. That's where I'd start, and if you want to play on your phone, if you want to respond to emails and that's fine. But if it's not one of your three most important, you don't do it until your three most important are done. Now, if you can't live like that, if you have to check the emails because of work or maybe, family issues, something like that, fine. Get the one most important done first before you let yourself get distracted with some of these other things. But I think that three most important, one must is a guideline that I've really seen the highly successful people embrace. And that's where they do a better job than normal people. See, it's not that highly successful people are really all that more skilled than normal people. They just are more consistently doing those most important activities daily. And the other thing, and I'll then kind of get your take on this, when it comes to improvements, always have one thing you're trying to improve at a time, but really try to discipline yourself from trying to learn 2 and 3 and 5 things in any one given day. It's just too much for the system. One thing at a time will create consistency with the improvement.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, because I was at dinner recently and my circle of friends tend to be people who are always trying to learn new things, always trying to get better. But at the same time, that can sometimes come at the detriment to what they're trying to learn. You mentioned there people will listen to this podcast. They might listen to another podcast later. Maybe they're reading one book. Maybe they're reading another book. They'll read some blog posts, and they're trying to read and learn too many things at one given time. And so we were talking about, well, rather than listening to 7 podcast episodes a day on double speed, why not just listen to one properly, take notes, let that information absorb, and then move forward when you've taken what you could out of that particular episode and you're in a position where you've got the cognitive load and capacity and the channel capacity, like you said, to learn something else. I mean, what are your views on that?
Yeah, so here's what I would challenge people to do. So, for example, I try to read every night. And my goal is, when I'm reading a book, I read until I learn one new concept or until my mind opens a door and I think of something new. But I'd read until I get one. And then I go back. And maybe it takes 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. It generally doesn't take long. Then instead of continuing to read on, I just read those 1, 2, or 3 pages a second time, and then I close the book and I'm done reading. I just read until I learn one thing. Now, with a podcast, again, that's the beauty of having it at your disposal. I could listen to it for 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes until I learn one thing, and then I might go back and listen to it again. Maybe not, but I'm going to stop after I learn one thing. And then tomorrow I'll come back and hit it again. But I really like the idea of, if I'm in learning mode, I only want to learn one thing. At this point in my life, if I learned one thing every day and really learned it, not learned it and then forgot it 5 minutes later because I learned something else, if I learn one thing a day, and let's say I did that even 3 days a week, I can only imagine how much better of a person I'm going to be in a year, in 5 years, in 15 years. Mm-hmm. But it's the inconsistency. I know, I used to be like everybody else, and I was trying to read 5 books a month, and I was forgetting 95% of the stuff I was learning.
Yeah.
And I really have learned to respect channel capacity. I know in my own personal life and a lot of the people I work with, it's one of the main things we work on, and it really can take a person's performance level immediately to that next level just by unloading some of the non-essential things.
Yeah, and we also should draw alignment between what you've said there around learning one thing a day, but also what you said a few moments earlier around making sure that you're learning something that will actually serve you, learning the right thing, because successful people choose the important things to learn, to do. So rather than just learning anything, let's make sure that what we're learning is in line with that person we want to be, say 5 years from now, 1 year from now, that's going to help us achieve those goals.
Very well said, Steve.
So in the 3 minutes we have left, I'd like to just cover building confidence, Jason. I was lucky enough to catch George St Pierre, former UFC champion in Melbourne over the weekend, and I got to ask him a question about where his persistence comes from, and somehow he took that as me talking about confidence. So I went off on a tangent, and he talked about a UFC card where all of his training partners, they were fighting that night. They all got beaten, and so he was in the dressing room. It was a very negative environment, and he just looked at himself in the mirror. He told himself those mantras. He built himself up. He said he was ready to go. I'm going to crush him. By the way, it's all fake, he said. Kind of like what you said earlier about telling yourself you're the world's best sports psychologist. It's all fake, but you do that to pump yourself up. Now, he was saying that confidence is a muscle, but in that dressing room at that time, he was surrounded by misery, by negativity. And oftentimes in sports, in business, in life, we might go through a 6-month stretch where things just are not working. Whether you're building that startup, whether you're trying to close some sales and you've been on the road for 3 months and nothing's happening, how might someone bounce or pull themselves out of the confidence lull?
Yeah, so confidence, so you know, it is the number one variable for human performance. The sports psychology texts, performance psychology texts are all going to say the same thing. And if you look at the research on confidence, the number one way to develop confidence is called to have the experience of success. Okay, so if I'm a fighter and I go out and I know the guy I'm fighting, I fought him, a year ago, and I totally knocked him out in the first round. It was easy. Well, of course, my confidence is going to be high. Mm-hmm. The second way, because in those situations, you really don't need a sports psychologist or a performance coach. If you're already winning, you don't need mental toughness. It's when things aren't going well, just as you mentioned, that's where you really need this stuff. Okay, so the second method of developing confidence is something called the vicarious experience of success. And that's where you do some of the mental preparation, whether it be positive self-talk and visualization. Now, most people in my field would say that, in essence, is the vicarious experience of success. Visualizing and positive self-talk might be 70, 80, 90% of that. I believe at best it's 30%. I realized very early on working with professional athletes that they could be mentally prepared all day long, but if they weren't physically prepared, it didn't matter. We were going to get beat. Yeah. And so you look at physical preparation. So in terms of like a fighter, he's got to know before he goes out there that he's done more work to prepare, that he is more prepared than the person he's going to compete against. And if he goes in there knowing that, his confidence will be high, not to mention his skill level will be high, which will be a self-reinforcing confidence loop. Same thing with us. Now, we're not going to, go against a bag and punch the bag and do 150 push-ups a day and then all kinds of exercises to get ready for our work day. But we want to make sure that we're putting the same level of effort. We want to know that when we walk in there, we have ourselves prepared. Now, again, I do believe that 30% of the battle is the mental side. That, yeah, you want to make sure you're talking to yourself the right way. You want to make sure you're visualizing the success. But if you have to do a presentation, make sure you've done the homework. Make sure you know the content better than anyone else in the room and better than your competitors. If you're going into a meeting where you need to coach someone up, have done a little homework on the person. Figure out what they need from you right there. Figure out what their deficiencies are and what the number one thing they need to improve on. And then have put some thought into it, put some research into, okay, if that's the issue, what are some proven methods of actually helping people improve there? But the key, in my opinion, to confidence is, 30% of it, make sure your mind's right. 70%, make sure you're prepared.
Great. So preparation plus visualization equals confidence.
Yeah. Physical preparation plus the mental preparation equals the confidence. But again, if I was going to give you a breakdown, I'd tell you the physical. Make sure you've done the homework. Make sure, if you're an athlete, that you've done the physical stuff, the training and so forth. If you're in the business world, make sure you've done the research, the homework. Make sure you know what you're getting yourself into and what some of the pitfalls have been and what some of the proven successes will be. And then you plug that stuff into the mental preparation. Visualize yourself executing with the knowledge. Talk to yourself the right way. Yeah, I think you're putting yourself in a position to win more often than not if you'll do that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Jason. We are just about out of time. So thank you for giving up some time to impart some wisdom for the listeners of Future Squared. It is very much appreciated. People can pick up a copy of your latest book, in fact, all of your books on Amazon, and where all good books are sold. And they can hit you up on Twitter at Jason_Selk and find out more about your company at enhancedperformanceinc.com. Is there anywhere else they should go?
Probably an easier website would be just jasonselk.com. But Steve, allow me to say one more thing, and this is to you and to all the listeners. You know, I've been really fortunate to work with some of the most successful, mentally tough people walking the planet. For 20 years now, I've been able to study those folks. And one of the characteristics that jumps out is they have something called the obsession for improvement. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about normal people are kind of screwing this obsession for improvement up by trying to improve everything all the time, all the way. What the highly successful people do is they're always looking for that just one, even if it's just an inch of improvement, just one little thing each day to get a little bit better at. The fact that you do this podcast for people, the fact that there are people listening to it, there is no doubt that is a true indication of that obsession for improvement. So you have, and all the listeners, they already have one of the most common characteristics of highly successful people. Just learn to direct it and use it. Remember, respect channel capacity and always have that one thing. I hope this 45, 50 minutes we spent together, I hope people can find one thing they can take and make themselves better immediately with.
Fantastic. Well, we'll add the number of things we discussed into the show notes for our listeners. And if they can just pull one thing out of that, then I'm sure they will improve by that 1% today. And like you said, it's about improving a little bit each day, but improving on the right thing, the one thing, and not trying to learn too many things at a time. So thank you again, Jason, for your time. You've been an awesome guest and have left our audience with a hell of a lot of value bombs. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're really good at what you do. I can tell that you really care about it just with the questions. You know, I can tell you're really trying to help people. So, I mean it. We need more people like you in this world. Please just give yourself some credit, will you? I'm guessing you're hard on yourself like most everybody else at your level is. But look, if there are more people like you out there trying to help other people, we'd be in a hell of a lot better spot. So keep it up. Keep it up. It's guys like you, we need to keep playing at that level. Hopefully we'll get more people playing there.
Cheers. Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe, and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, please take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or Spotify. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. Until next time, Future Squared is out.